Parkinson's is really tricky. We don't know good days from bad days until you're in it. You can plan and plan and plan and plan, but you just don't.
They called him the Prince of Darkness, the godfather of heavy metal, the madman who once bit the head off a bat and screamed into the void of music history with unmatched fury. Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just a performer. He was a living legend, a man whose name became synonymous with rebellion, excess, and raw authenticity. For over 5 decades, he dominated the global rock scene, first as the electrifying frontman of Black Sabbath, then as a solo force that defined generations. But as time marched on, even the loudest voices grow quiet. In the final years of his life, the fire inside Ozzy still burned, but the vessel that carried it, his body, began to falter. This chapter isn't about the stages he conquered or the records he shattered. It's about the beginning of the end. It's about a man who had lived 10 lifetimes in one, now quietly reckoning with his mortality. Ozzy's decline wasn't sudden. It was slow, painful, and deeply public. He had always been transparent with fans, never shying away from the ugly parts of fame or life. That's what made him so beloved. He didn't pretend. In 2020, he revealed a devastating diagnosis: Parkinson's disease, a progressive nervous system disorder that affects movement. It wasn't entirely surprising to those who had followed his health journey. Ozzy had already survived a terrifying ATV accident in 2003 that left him with a broken collarbone, 8 fractured ribs, and a damaged neck vertebra. Years of drug and alcohol abuse had also taken a toll, but Parkinson's was different. It wasn't just a battle, it was a war he knew he couldn't win. Still, he tried. In true Ozzy fashion, he kept going, kept recording, kept dreaming of getting back on stage. "I'm not dying from Parkinson's," he told reporters. "I've been working with it most of my life." But those close to him knew better. Behind the scenes, Ozzy's world was slowly becoming smaller. Walking became harder. His speech slurred on bad days. His hands trembled. And yet, every time he spoke to fans, he cracked a joke. Every time he gave an interview, he smiled. Sharon, his wife and rock for over 40 years, stood by him like a sentinel, guiding, protecting, and loving him through every step of the decline. She was his anchor, and she knew time was slipping away. Sharon later admitted that there were days Ozzy would just sit silently, staring out the window, lost in thought. Not sad, not scared, just quiet. "He's lived such a loud life," she once said, "and now he enjoys the silence. He's made peace with a lot." But that peace didn't come easy. There were nights when the pain in his spine kept him awake. Nights when he would wake up crying, not from fear, but from frustration. Frustration that he couldn't do what he used to. That he could no longer run across a stage or hold a guitar without shaking. He hated the helplessness, hated relying on others. For a man who once controlled the roar of 50,000 fans with a single scream, being confined to a chair felt like a prison. But even in these difficult moments, Ozzy never lost his spark completely. One day, while sitting on his porch, he saw a bird land nearby and began softly humming one of his songs. "Crazy Train," Sharon said with a smile. He hummed the riff. I started laughing, and he just gave me that look like, "I'm still here, woman." That was Ozzy. Always present. Always Ozzy. Even when the world thought he was fading, he found a way to remind everyone he was still the same soul deep down. He had moments of denial, too. He'd wake up on a good day and tell Sharon, "Book me a gig, I'll do one more." And for a brief second, they'd both pretend it was possible. But the doctors knew better. And so did Sharon. Still, she played along, because that hope, that spark, was all he had left some days. And hope is a beautiful thing, even when you know it's fleeting. Throughout this time, fans never stopped loving him. Tributes poured in. Letters from all over the world flooded his home. Young kids who discovered him through their parents, older fans who had followed him since 1970. "Thank you for saving me," many of them wrote. "Your music helped me survive." Ozzy would read them, sometimes with tears in his eyes. "They think I saved them," he once whispered, "but they saved me." This wasn't the rock god the world knew. This was a man, older, broken, but still filled with gratitude. He didn't need the stage anymore to feel loved. He had it. Everywhere. From everyone. That was perhaps the most beautiful twist in his story. The man who screamed the loudest learned to receive love in silence. As time passed, his outings became less frequent. No more public appearances, no more surprise interviews. The world slowly began to realize what was coming. Sharon made vague, public statements about his health, never confirming, never denying. "He's doing as well as can be expected," she'd say. But those close to the family knew. This was the final chapter. Still, Ozzy remained involved in small ways. He'd sit in on Zoom meetings about posthumous projects, listen to unreleased mixes from old studio sessions, give nods of approval. He may not have had the strength to stand, but his mind, when sharp, was still full of music, full of opinions, and full of fire. "You're not using that guitar tone, are you?" he once said with a smirk to a producer. "Sounds like crap." That was Ozzy, even in decline, still brutally honest, still passionate. But the decline was undeniable. The bad days outnumbered the good. The tremors grew worse. Pain medication became constant. Sharon stopped leaving the house entirely, wanting to be there for every moment. She canceled appearances, postponed projects. "Nothing matters now," she told friends. "Only him." Then came the moment when even Ozzy, stubborn and fierce, finally admitted it. "I don't think I've got much time," he told Jack one night. "But I've had one hell of a ride." Jack, trying to hold back tears, nodded. What could he say? What words could ever be enough for a man like Ozzy, a man who had been a father, a rock star, a mess, a miracle, all in one? And so, they began to prepare, not for death, but for peace, for closure. Sharon arranged quiet visits with those Ozzy still wanted to see, old bandmates, close friends, no press, no cameras, just raw, real goodbyes. The house was filled not with grief, but with gratitude, with laughter, with memories. Sharon said it best. We weren't mourning yet, we were celebrating, because every day was a gift. This was the beginning of the end, but also somehow a new kind of beginning, a chapter where Ozzy didn't have to perform, didn't have to pretend, didn't have to be anything except human. And that made him more legendary than ever before, as Ozzy Osbourne's health continued to fade. The world outside grew quieter, but inside his home the atmosphere was filled with warmth, sorrow, laughter, and love. In his final years, the heavy metal icon, once known for his outrageous antics and bone-shaking concerts, shifted his focus inward. Gone were the days of headbanging in front of thousands. Now his universe revolved around the people who mattered most, his family. For Ozzy, the noise had stopped, but in its place came something far more powerful: presence, vulnerability, and emotional closeness that had eluded him in his younger, more chaotic years. These moments, though stripped of fame and fanfare, were the most beautiful of his life. In them, the Prince of Darkness was not a rock god, but a husband, a father, a grandfather, a man rediscovering the raw truth of love. Sharon Osbourne had always been more than Ozzy's wife. She had been his manager, his protector, his shield, and his sharpest critic. But now she was simply his caretaker and his constant companion. There were no deals to negotiate, no tours to book. There were quiet breakfasts on the patio, brief conversations about nothing and everything, soft music playing in the background. Sharon would often sit beside him, holding his hand while they listened to old songs, Sometimes Black Sabbath, sometimes the Beatles, sometimes just the birds outside. She said in a later interview, "We'd been through hell together, and somehow we made it to this place where everything was stripped away except what was real." What was real was Ozzy's love for her, unwavering despite decades of public scandal, infidelity, addiction, and near-death experiences. In his final stretch of life, Ozzy didn't want gold records or awards. He just wanted Sharon's voice, her touch, her forgiveness. Their children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack, visited, often, sometimes with their own children in tow. These reunions weren't grand family events. They were tender, quiet moments. Kelly, always close to her father, would sit with him for hours, sometimes reading aloud old letters fans had sent. Jack brought in old home videos, footage from the days of the Osbournes, and even earlier. Ozzy would chuckle at his younger self. "God, I was such a mess," he'd say, laughing through the pain. But it was laughter, not regret. That was important. He wasn't afraid of who he had been anymore. He had made peace with the man who screamed into microphones and stumbled through chaos. He now embraced that man, and his children embraced him. One of the most touching moments came when Ozzy met his youngest grandchild for the first time. The baby, just learning to smile, grabbed his finger. Ozzy, weakened and shaking, broke down in tears. "He doesn't know who I am," he whispered, "but I'll always be part of him." That moment encapsulated what the final months were about: legacy, not in the form of albums or headlines, but in blood, in laughter, in connection. Ozzy may have lived for the stage, but he died for his family. Every remaining heartbeat was spent on making sure they knew he loved them. Even his estranged daughter Amy, who had famously distanced herself from the family's reality TV fame, returned to his side. Their conversations were short, sometimes awkward, but always real. There was no time left for resentment. He looked at me and said, "I was never the father you deserved, but I loved you more than I knew how to show," Amy later revealed. That one sentence healed a wound that had been open for decades. In a life filled with noise, it was the quietest words that mattered most. Sharon often reflected on how different these final months felt compared to the early chaos of their marriage. In those days, Ozzy was unpredictable, dangerous, lost in addiction and rage. But in the end, he was still her Ozzy, the man who made her laugh, who whispered love notes in her ear when the cameras weren't rolling. There was a story she told again and again. One morning, just before dawn, she woke up to find Ozzy staring at her. His body was frail, his skin pale, but his eyes, those unmistakable Ozzy eyes, were clear. "You're the only thing I did, right?" he said. Sharon couldn't stop crying. "And you were always worth the fight," she replied. That morning, they didn't speak again for hours. They didn't need to, but love is complicated, especially when interwoven with decades of pain. Ozzy had moments of guilt, memories that haunted him, nights when he had yelled, times he had disappeared, the emotional absence that came with addiction. "I miss too much," he told Jack during one of their final conversations, "but I never stopped loving you all." Jack, who had grown into a father himself, simply nodded. "We know, Dad, we know." There was no need to relive it all. The important thing was that Ozzy wanted to say it, that he finally could. The Osbourne family, once famous for airing their dysfunction on MTV, had grown into something quietly beautiful, deeply flawed, yes, but united by love. Ozzy's home became a sanctuary in his final months. No paparazzi, no management, no chaos, just the hum of daily life, the smell of Sharon's cooking, the chatter of grandchildren playing, dogs barking, laughter echoing down the halls. Sharon kept the house filled with music, Not always Ozzy's. Sometimes old Motown, sometimes Elton John, sometimes silence. Ozzy, often confined to a recliner near the window, would gaze outside for hours. Sharon said he seemed to be waiting for what? She didn't know. Maybe for peace. Maybe for the end. Maybe just for the sun to set one more time. But he wasn't alone. He was never alone. Friends visited. Some came with tears, others with jokes. Tony Iommi, his Black Sabbath brother, brought an old guitar once. The two sat silently, each holding a pick. No words, no music, just presence. That was enough. Even his longtime friend and collaborator, Zakk Wylde, came and went like family. One day, he played a soft acoustic version of Mama, I'm Coming Home. Ozzy cried through the entire performance. Sharon later said it was the most raw she had ever seen him. That song meant something new now. It wasn't about tours or stage lights. It was about him, really going home. The emotional weight of these visits never broke Ozzy. It softened him. He told Sharon one evening, I've never felt more alive than I do now, knowing I don't have forever. That's what love gave him, a reason to still be here. Even when his legs couldn't carry him, even when he couldn't sing. His heart was still speaking volumes, and in the end, that's what made this chapter in his life so different. It wasn't about concerts or accolades. It wasn't about scandal or survival. It was about forgiveness, about softness, about facing his past with eyes wide open, not flinching, not hiding. Ozzy Osbourne had lived as a storm, but in his final days, he became the calm after, and his family, flawed, fierce, and fiercely loving, stood beside him until the end. As the sun began to set on Ozzy Osbourne's incredible life, everything slowed down. The world, which once seemed to spin on the chaos of his every move, paused. His home became quieter, his conversations more limited, and his body weaker. But in that stillness came a haunting beauty, a sense that the time for final goodbyes had come, and everyone around him, whether family, friend, or fan, knew it. Ozzy himself seemed to know. He no longer asked when he could return to the stage. He no longer talked about future plans or new projects. Instead, he asked about old memories, about people long gone, about what came next. This wasn't fear. It was readiness, acceptance. The storm had finally found its shore. One of the most poignant things about Ozzy's final days was how he chose to say goodbye. Not through grand gestures or tearful statements on television, but privately, personally, soulfully. He wanted to speak to people he loved, or those who had shaped his life, one by one. Sharon, ever his guardian, coordinated the visits. No photographers, no media, just human connection. He asked to see Tony Iommi again, the man who had started it all with him. Their history was complex, full of tension, reconciliation, and mutual respect. When Tony arrived, he didn't bring guitars or old records. He brought silence. The two men sat together for hours, few words exchanged. Tony placed a hand on Ozzy's and simply said, "We changed the world, brother." Ozzy nodded, tears in his eyes, and I'd do it all again. Zakk Wylde's goodbye was less quiet, more emotional. The man who had been Ozzy's musical right hand for decades couldn't hold back. He broke down the moment he saw Ozzy in bed. "You're my hero, man," he said, clutching Ozzy's hand. "You gave me everything." Ozzy, voice raspy but full of clarity, whispered back, "You gave it all right back." They laughed through their tears, reminisced about their wildest shows, and cried again. Zakk played one last song on acoustic guitar, something soft and unfinished. Ozzy listened, then closed his eyes. He didn't need to say a word. Other friends came and went. Rob Halford, Geezer Butler, some just called. Sharon would hold the phone to Ozzy's ear while his eyes fluttered open and closed. Some days he could speak. Other days, he just listened. But always, always, he was present, emotionally there, listening, absorbing, forgiving, loving. And he never forgot his fans. Though too weak to record a video, Ozzy insisted on writing one last message. With Sharon guiding his hand, he scrawled the words, "Thank you for saving me. I'll see you on the other side." It was simple, honest, pure Ozzy. He also made time for his family more than ever before. There were private moments between him and each of his children. With Kelly, he talked about their shared love of music, of the stage. "You've got it," he said. "You've always had it." With Jack, he spoke about strength, about being a father, and about forgiveness. "I didn't always get it." "Right," Ozzy told him. "But I see you, Jack. I see the man you are, and I'm proud." Amy's goodbye was quiet, full of small smiles and unspoken words. They didn't need to rehash the past. Just being together was enough. Then there was Sharon, the most difficult farewell. Because how do you say goodbye to the person who carried you when you couldn't walk, who loved you when you didn't love yourself, who stood in the fire with you and refused to leave? They spent hours together, sometimes in total silence, just breathing, just being. Sharon would stroke his hair, rub his hands, whisper to him. "It's okay, my love," she said. "You can rest." He would nod faintly. Some nights he'd tell her old stories. Some nights he would just look at her with wide, wet eyes, as if memorizing her face. One night, Sharon brought him a scrapbook, one she had been secretly assembling. Inside were photos from every chapter of their life: tour buses, weddings, birthdays, rehab, red carpets, ordinary dinners at home. Ozzy flipped through the pages slowly, his fingers trembling. He stopped at a photo of the two of them in the 80s, young and reckless. "That's when I knew," he said softly. "Knew you were my forever." Sharon didn't say anything. She just kissed his forehead. That was their last true conversation. The final 72 hours came like a whisper. His breathing slowed. He slept more, ate less. His pain was managed with care, his surroundings filled with comfort. Candles, dim lights, classical music, family nearby, and outside his window the garden he loved so much. He didn't speak much anymore, just looked, listened, felt. On the last night, everyone was there. Sharon holding one hand, Kelly the other. Jack sat at his feet. Amy and the grandchildren were nearby. The room was quiet, except for the sound of soft music. "Imagine" by John Lennon playing gently in the background. Sharon leaned down, whispering to him again. "You did good, my love. You did more than good. You were everything." Ozzy blinked slowly. A tear rolled down. And as the final chord of the song played, his breath grew lighter, softer, until finally it stopped. There was no scream, no spectacle, just peace. The man who had roared for generations left the world with a sigh. And in that moment, the silence was louder than any concert he'd ever played. The family stayed in the room for a long time. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Kelly began to hum one of his songs, Dreamer. Jack joined in, even the children. Sharon held Ozzy's hand until it turned cold. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me." Word spread slowly at first, then like wildfire. Within hours, the music world exploded with tributes. Artists from every genre posted memories, shared photos, quoted lyrics. Black Sabbath's official page posted a single image: Ozzy on stage, arms raised with the caption, "Forever our brother, rest in power." Elton John, Metallica, Foo Fighters, even Paul McCartney, all paid tribute. The world had lost a legend. But they knew legends don't die, they echo. In the days following Ozzy Osbourne's passing, the world paused to mourn, but also to remember. Tributes echoed across continents, from candlelit vigils in small towns to stadiums full of fans, singing his lyrics. Television, shows, radio stations, and podcasts dedicated entire days to his legacy. But the most powerful remembrance wasn't in the headlines or hashtags. It was in the music. The sound of a generation suddenly sounded more sacred. Every riff of Iron. Man, every lyric of Crazy Train, every haunting word of Mama, I'm Coming Home, felt heavier, deeper. Because the man behind those words was gone, and yet somehow more present than ever. Ozzy's death didn't just mark the end of a career. It marked the conclusion of one of rock music's most enduring, chaotic, and ultimately redemptive human stories. His fans knew him as a madman, but they also knew him as a survivor. A man who faced his demons again and again, and somehow kept coming back stronger, wiser, and softer. The outpouring of grief came not just from celebrities and musicians, but from people across the world whose lives he had touched. Nurses in hospitals who had danced to his music during night shifts, soldiers who blasted war pigs in the deserts of war zones, teenagers who played Paranoid to feel less alone. Ozzy didn't just create music, he created moments. He created meaning. And now, those echoes refused to fade. In Los Angeles, thousands gathered outside the Hollywood Walk of Fame, laying down candles, flowers, and handwritten letters beside his star. Some wept openly. Others sang. Some just stood there in silence. A young man in his 20s said to a reporter, "My dad introduced me to Ozzy. We bonded over his music. He's the reason we're close. Now it feels like I lost a part of both of them." That was Ozzy's power. He wasn't just an artist. He was a bridge between generations, between rage and healing, between destruction and rebirth. The Osbourne family, grieving privately, issued a statement through Sharon. Ozzy passed peacefully, surrounded by family, love, and music. He gave the world everything he had, and in the end, he received more love than he ever thought possible. We ask for privacy as we honor him, but we thank every one of you for making his life so unforgettable. It was brief, heartfelt, and classic Sharon, measured strength beneath unbearable sorrow. Ozzy's funeral was private, attended by close family and lifelong friends. No cameras, no reporters, just people who loved him. They played his favorite songs, not just his own, but the ones that shaped him. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Motown classics. Tony Iommi gave a speech that reportedly left everyone in tears. "He wasn't perfect," he said. "None of us were. But he had the biggest heart I've ever known. And he carried the weight of the world in that voice of his. Now he's free." But fans needed a public way to say goodbye. And so, a global memorial concert was announced. Ozzy Forever, a one-night-only event held simultaneously in London, Birmingham, and Los Angeles, featuring artists from every generation performing Ozzy's music. The lineup read like a Hall of Fame induction. Metallica, Dave Grohl, Post Malone, Elton John, Ghost, Judas Priest, and even Billie Eilish. Each artist brought something unique to the stage, yet all centered around the same purpose, to honor the man who had shaped so many. Sharon and the children appeared on stage, visibly emotional, to thank the crowd. "He's watching," Kelly said, "and he's probably wondering what all the fuss is about." That night, the world didn't just mourn, it celebrated, with fire, with tears, with guitars and screams and full hearts. That was the only way to honor Ozzy Osbourne properly, not with silence, but with sound, with chaos, with soul. In the months following his death, tributes continued to pour in. Murals of his face appeared in cities around the world. Streets were renamed in Birmingham, his hometown. Music schools added curriculum based on his songwriting. Universities analyzed his lyrics in cultural studies classes. Ozzy had become something few musicians ever achieve, a symbol, not just of rebellion or music, but of perseverance, of flawed, furious, messy humanity that refuses to be defined by failure. And yet what mattered most was not how the world remembered him, but how his family did. Jack, in a podcast interview, shared a story. When I was about 12, I told my dad I wanted to quit school and be a rock star. He looked at me and said, "Why don't you finish school and change the world in your own way?" Oh, he never wanted me to be like him. He wanted me to be better. That's love. Kelly, in a tearful television appearance, said, "People ask me what he was like. I tell them, he was loud, he was wild, but he loved harder than anyone I've ever known. He never gave up on us, even when we gave up on him." Amy, who had kept her distance from the limelight, published a letter to her father in a magazine. "You weren't perfect, but you were honest. You made mistakes, but you apologized. You hurt, but you always came back. You showed me what redemption looks like. I will miss your voice, but I'll carry your words forever." Sharon, always composed, always sharp, took longer to speak publicly. When she finally did, it was at a special tribute hosted by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She walked to the podium, her voice trembling only slightly. "I spent over 40 years loving that man. He drove me mad. He made me laugh. He broke my heart. But I would do it all again, because loving Ozzy Osbourne was the most extraordinary adventure anyone could ever have, and I was lucky enough to go on it." Ozzy's voice didn't leave the world. It became something new, eternal. His music re-entered the charts. Young artists cited him in interviews. Old records were reissued. Documentaries were greenlit. But it wasn't just nostalgia, it was reverence. People were listening again, not just to the lyrics, but to the pain, the soul, the truth behind them. In a world that often demands perfection, Ozzy showed that brokenness could be beautiful. That survival wasn't just about living, it was about learning, about healing, and about loving, even when it hurt. And maybe that's what made his final moments so heartbreakingly beautiful. The stage lights had gone out. The crowd had gone home. The amps were silent. But Ozzy remained, softened, grateful, and loved. Not just for what he gave us, but for who he became. Ozzy's music shook the world, but his final days remind us that even legends are human. If his journey moved you, if his strength, his pain, and his love touched your soul, please hit that like button. Share this video so others can remember him not just as the Prince of Darkness, but as a man who loved deeply and lived fully. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that honor the hearts behind the headlines. Ozzy may be gone, but his voice, his legacy, will echo forever.